June 15, 1943. The ink in a German lieutenant's notebook smeared slightly as he wrote while the train jolted. The page was marked secret, a private log he never intended for his captors to see. He had been seized in North Africa, herded across the Atlantic with hundreds of other prisoners, and now, through the rattling slats of a railcar, he stared at a countryside that did not fit the propaganda portraits drilled into him back in Hamburg. Instead of starving peasants or crumbling tenements, he saw silos standing tall, barns freshly painted, and roads that stretched like arteries across a continent that seemed impossibly vast. At first, his shock was not about the machinery of war, but about the simple abundance of food. At a siding near St. Louis, a quartermaster handed local civilians crates of oranges, apples, and flour. The lieutenant noted that each box weighed nearly 50 pounds, and dozens of them were stacked like nothing. In North Africa, German units fought for every tin of meat. Here, supplies spilled from trucks like water from a spring. The smell of roasting peanuts from a nearby stand mixed with the locomotive's hot oil, leaving the prisoners dizzy with hunger and astonishment. On the Atlantic crossing, the prisoners had already glimpsed something unsettling. The ship carrying them was an aging transport, but alongside it in New York Harbor, they saw Liberty ships sliding into the water almost daily. Records later showed that by mid-1943, American yards launched one of these cargo giants every 42 days per slip, a rhythm so mechanical it resembled a factory line more than a shipyard. The prisoners whispered that the Reich could not match such tempo. They were right. German yards took more than a year to assemble a comparable vessel. The next blow came when the train pushed inland. The prisoners expected desolation in the Midwest, yet they found towns glowing with electric light even at night. Every depot had humming transformers, wires strung like spiderwebs over every street. One POW scribbled in his diary that he saw more light bulbs in a single station than in the entire village of his birth. Quartermaster tallies confirmed that by 1943, the United States generated over 150 billion kilowatt-hours annually, dwarfing the combined output of Germany and occupied Europe. The revelation was clear. Even small American towns consumed more electricity than German cities struggling under blackout orders. In camp, the prisoners encountered a different shock: rations. A Red Cross report from Camp Crossville, Tennessee, recorded that each German received about 3,000 calories per day, including bread, meat, and coffee. Coffee itself was a marvel. In Europe, it had long vanished, replaced by bitter roasted barley. Here, steaming mugs appeared with breakfast, rich and black. The aroma clung to the canvas mess tent, mingling with bacon fat and frying potatoes. One corporal whispered, "This is not punishment. This is more than we had at home." The guards were ordinary American boys, often only a year or two older than the prisoners. They joked, smoked Lucky Strikes, and carried radios that crackled with swing music. Benny Goodman's clarinet filtered through the static, alien and intoxicating. A captured sergeant had been told America was collapsing under strikes and racial unrest. Yet the guards sang while stacking boxes and swapped stories about wages from the factory lines back home. Their boots were new, their uniforms crisp, their packs filled with items German soldiers bought only on black markets: chocolate, gum, even razor blades wrapped in shiny paper. Every 200 miles, the prisoners were jolted by another sign of scale. Endless wheat fields rolled by, broken by rivers crowded with barges. At a siding near Kansas City, they watched tank cars being coupled in chains of 60, each filled with gasoline. A field log from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers noted that the Midwest pipelines were pushing over 300,000 barrels per day toward the coasts. The prisoners, many of them tank crewmen, understood immediately. Panzers in Tunisia had died for lack of fuel. Here, fuel poured like a river with no end. Night brought its own revelations. In Germany, air raids had forced blackouts so severe that a candle in a window could invite punishment. But in Illinois, the train passed through towns where neon signs still glowed after midnight. Coca-Cola shone in red letters 3 meters tall. The light reflected in the glassy eyes of exhausted men who realized they had been fighting in shadows while their captors lived in brightness. A chaplain riding with the train recorded in his own diary that some prisoners crossed themselves when they saw an illuminated church. Steeple lit against the dark, letters became another thread in this tapestry of surprise. By Geneva Convention rules, The Germans were allowed to send and receive mail. In 1943 alone, more than 25 million POW letters crossed the Atlantic under Red Cross supervision. The smell of ink and paper, fresh from American post offices, carried a message the Guards never intended. The logistical muscle to process millions of envelopes during wartime signaled a bureaucracy functioning at full stride. A private from Saxony wrote to his sister that the enemy has more stamps and trucks than we have bullets. Human touches reinforced the industrial picture. At Camp Swift in Texas, prisoners were astonished to find a small theater where a chaplain screened reels of American news films. The whir of the projector, the scent of hot dust from the lamp, the rustle of popcorn among guards, these were not the sounds of a country buckling under total war. They were the sounds of a society that could fight abroad and still indulge in leisure at home. A tank commander scribbled in pencil as rain struck the canvas roof, noting that his enemy's resilience was measured not just in steel, but in spirit. The journey to camps was itself proof. Trains ran on schedule, coaches clean, locomotives powerful. In 1943, the American rail network moved over 700 million tons of freight, a figure quartermasters proudly repeated. For prisoners used to German lines strained by bombing, the constant motion of trains in multiple directions seemed surreal. One recalled that he could smell fresh creosote on every tie, evidence of maintenance carried out even while millions of troops deployed overseas. By the time the prisoners settled into their barbed wire compounds, the shock had become layered. It was not simply the sight of plentiful food or bright lights. It was the realization that the United States was not fighting with its last reserves. It was fighting with its surpluses. A sergeant remarked quietly, "If this is how they treat prisoners, how strong must they be at the front?" His words drifted into silence, carried on the smell of wet grass after a summer storm swept across the compound. Yet the greatest reveal still lay ahead. For beyond the rations and the radios, beyond the letters and the lights, the prisoners had not yet seen the real furnaces of America's power. They had not seen the yards where ships rose like corn in a field, nor the factories where bombers rolled out by the hour. That vision would come next, and when it did, it would not just shock them, it would shatter the last illusions of the Reich. And so the first chapter of their captivity closed not with despair, but with dawning comprehension. The America glimpsed from train windows and camp mess halls was already larger than the Reich had promised. But soon they would stand in the shadows of smokestacks and see machines spitting fire day and night, proof that the enemy's strength was more than propaganda. It was steel, oil, and endless motion. The next chapter began with steel. For many German prisoners, their first work details or escorted trips revealed the American shipyards, and nothing in their old world prepared them for what they saw. In Bremen or Kiel, construction halls were long echoing caverns, where one or two hulls inched forward under constant shortages. In places like Richmond, California, and Portland, Oregon, they watched Liberty ships slide down greased ways every few days. Shipyard tallies confirmed it. By late 1943, a single yard could launch more than 100 vessels a year. The clang of rivet guns, the hiss of torches, and the smell of burning paint overwhelmed the senses. A prisoner wrote that, "These ships grow like mushrooms after rain." It was not metaphor, it was math. An American yard could outbuild the entire Kriegsmarine in a season. Factories delivered an equal blow. In Michigan, some prisoners glimpsed Willow Run, the bomber plant designed like a conveyor belt. From above, its roof stretched a mile, longer than some villages back home. Quartermaster notes recorded that Willow Run turned out one B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes at its peak. Imagine being a Luftwaffe mechanic who once fought for weeks to keep a single bomber flight-worthy, now staring at a line that spat them out like loaves of bread. The smell of lubricants and hot steel hung in the air, while forklifts beeped and sparks showered from welding rigs. A corporal whispered to another, "How can we win if they build faster than we can burn?" Electricity was the invisible engine. In Germany, coal shortages forced rolling blackouts, halting production for hours. In the United States, even the smallest towns were ablaze with neon and floodlights. Hydroelectric dams on the Columbia and Tennessee rivers poured out current by the billions of kilowatt-hours. Government bulletins from 1943 boasted that the Grand Coulee Dam alone generated 6,400,000 kilowatts, enough to feed aluminum smelters that ran day and night. POWs who had worked in metal shops understood the implication instantly. Every ingot rolling off those belts was another airplane wing or tank plate. The low hum of dynamos, the warm ozone tang in the air became the sound and smell of defeat. What astonished the prisoners just as much was the abundance spilling beyond the war machine. In camp canteens they tasted items they had not seen in years. A Hershey bar cost a guard only a nickel, while in occupied Europe, chocolate had become a black market luxury priced in weeks of wages. Fresh milk was served daily in camps located near dairy regions. Quartermaster logs noted deliveries of more than 300 gallons per week for a single compound. For men raised on ersatz margarine and acorn coffee, the first sip of real milk or bite of sweet candy was not simply a treat. It was proof of an economy so far ahead that it could feed prisoners' luxuries. The contrast extended to wages. Prisoners assigned to agricultural or industrial details were credited with token pay, usually 80 cents a day, convertible at camp canteens. It startled them that American civilians on assembly lines earned up to $1 an hour, tenfold higher. Guards spoke casually of buying cars after a few months' savings. Their Ford sedan rolled off the line for $800 in 1942, while German workers under rationing could scarcely imagine affording one at all. When prisoners asked if so many cars were necessary, a guard shrugged. Everyone drives. The smell of gasoline and the sight of endless traffic on American roads made that boast undeniable. Everyday abundance revealed itself in small domestic ways. At a farm near Iowa, POWs picking corn were served lunch by the farmer's wife. She laid out thick sandwiches, apple pie, and tall glasses of lemonade sweating in the summer sun. The men ate in silence, astonished that a civilian table during wartime offered more calories than a frontline ration in North Africa. A diary entry from one prisoner simply read, "If this is ordinary, then our leaders have lied." The clatter of cutlery on porcelain plates became as convincing as any factory. Turret numbers reinforced the senses. U.S. Department of Agriculture records showed wheat harvests exceeding 1.2 billion bushels in 1943, compared to Germany's 700 million. The prisoners didn't need the reports. They saw the towering grain elevators, the endless convoys of trucks. At night, trains rattled by camp fences with boxcars stenciled 200,000 lbs Capi, a figure painted so large it seemed a taunt. Each ton rolling past the barbed wire was another reminder that America fought with weight, not scraps. Consumer goods completed the picture. Guards wore watches, carried fountain pens, and smoked brand cigarettes without concern. A pack of Lucky Strikes cost 15 cents in a PX. One prisoner later confessed that he had thought only officers or black marketeers could afford such items. Here, even the farm boys who pulled gate duty had pockets full of them. The sweet smell of tobacco smoke drifted across the compound, carrying envy and disbelief. To men who had once traded soap for a single cigarette butt, it felt like another world. The prisoners also noticed a cultural difference. In Germany, music and film had been stripped down to propaganda. In America, swing bands, Hollywood reels, and comic books flourished even during total war. A Red Cross observer described prisoners at Camp McCoy watching Charlie Chaplin shorts projected on a bedsheet. The roar of laughter, mingled with the projector's whir, shook men who thought entertainment had no place in wartime. One POW remarked that a people who can still laugh so loudly while at war are dangerous. The implication was clear. America's strength was not just in steel, but in spirit. Even small details mattered. Prisoners who worked in sawmills noted that American blades were replaced at the first sign of dulling. In Germany, a single blade might be sharpened again and again until it snapped. The smell of resin and the sight of shiny new tools became symbols of an economy with deep reserves. As POW engineer calculated privately that the US used more steel on civilian nails each year than Germany used on panzer armor. His numbers were not exact, but the impression was accurate. Resources here flowed in torrents, not trickles. Letters from home reinforced the contrast. Families in Germany described ration cards shrinking, coal shortages biting, and air raids gutting neighborhoods. Meanwhile, American newspapers distributed in camps featured advertisements for refrigerators, washing machines, and even new home construction. A Sunday edition of the Chicago Tribune carried over 60 pages of ads. To men who had left bomb-scarred cities, The sight of glossy pictures of toasters and radios was almost obscene, yet it was also persuasive. A Reich that promised victory now looked like it was fighting to stand still, while its enemy surged ahead with abundance. As months passed, the shock hardened into realization. The Reich had preached that America was soft, decadent, unable to endure. What the prisoners saw was different. Factories that never slept, farms that fed millions, families that still bought cars and houses in the middle of global war. The smell of diesel from convoys, the sight of bright electric grids, the taste of rich food in canteens, all told the same story. America's war was not fought on ration crumbs, but on overflowing tables, and yet this was still only half the picture, for the prisoners had been shown the products, the rations, the wages. They had not yet lived among the people in steady rhythm, working side by side in fields or factories, experiencing the humanity that would pry open old certainties. That revelation, the moment when ideology met ordinary kindness, still waited. Soon enough, Christmas packages, medical care, and unexpected lessons in classrooms would bring the most shattering realization of all, that their captors were not merely strong, but humane. By the winter of 1943, many German prisoners had settled into a rhythm inside their barbed wire compounds. Yet captivity was not defined only by fences. Geneva Convention rules allowed the United States to employ POW labor, and soon thousands of men were escorted beyond the wire to fields, sawmills, and factories. For many, this was the moment when the abstractions of America's abundance became tangible. Work details were not brutal chain gangs, as they had been warned. They were structured, paid, and often surprisingly humane. One such assignment sent prisoners into the cotton fields of Texas. At dawn, under a sky streaked with pink, they filed into rows that stretched farther than the eye could follow. Each man carried a burlap sack. Each sack, when weighed, added a few cents of credit to camp accounts. The smell of earth mixed with the sweet tang of cotton bolls, and for some the scene felt strangely familiar, work not unlike farm labor back home. Yet here they noticed something different. Tractors rumbling across adjacent fields, mechanical pickers devouring rows in minutes. Quartermaster tallies confirmed what their eyes saw. American agriculture produced over 90 million bales of cotton by war's end, nearly double Germany's pre-war output. Sweat and soil carried their own lesson. The Reich's hand labor could not match America's machines. Other details placed them in canning plants or lumber yards. At a cannery in Wisconsin, prisoners watched conveyor belts rattle jars forward with military precision. The hiss of steam, the clatter of glass, and the sharp smell of vinegar from pickles in brine surrounded them. In one shift, a single plant processed more food than an entire German division received in a month. POW diaries captured their disbelief. If this is only for civilians, how much more must their armies eat? In the sawmills of Oregon, the roar of blades echoed through the hills, sending showers of resin-scented chips across workbenches. A single mill produced 200,000 board feet a day. Compared to shortages in occupied Europe, the scale bordered on fantasy, but numbers alone did not transform minds. It was human moments that cracked hardened ideologies. On Christmas Eve of 1943, a chaplain at Camp Clinton in Mississippi arranged a service. Prisoners were invited to sing carols in their own language. The wooden hall smelled of pine boughs draped as decoration. Guards stood quietly, hats removed, while voices rose in Stille Nacht. Afterward, the prisoners were stunned to find packages waiting, candied fruit, cigarettes, and small gifts prepared by local church groups. A sergeant wrote that he had expected cruelty on the holy night. Instead, he received kindness. Such experiences slipped into memory like seeds, ready to grow later. Medical care offered another shock. At Camp Atterbury in Indiana, an outbreak of influenza swept through the barracks. Rather than neglect them, American medics arrived with thermometers, blankets, and sulfur drugs. One prisoner, a former medic himself, marveled that each fever patient received individual attention. Quartermaster logs show that over 25,000 sulfur tablets were distributed across camps that season. To men raised on tales of American barbarity, this generosity undercut every speech they had memorized about Yankee cruelty. The smell of antiseptic, the cool touch of clean sheets, these became proof stronger than any leaflet. Education added another layer. Some camps established classes where German officers lectured under supervision. But American staff also offered English lessons, mathematics, even vocational training. In Camp Crossville, Tennessee, prisoners could learn carpentry or mechanics. One lieutenant who joined an English class later admitted that he initially saw it as a chance to mock the language. By spring, he was writing letters with American phrases sprinkled in. The chalk dust on the blackboard, the scrape of pencils, the murmur of recitation, all these sounds made captivity feel less like punishment and more like preparation for something unexpected, a future after war. Still, not every encounter softened hearts. Ideological diehards existed, and camp authorities separated the most radical prisoners when necessary. In Fort Devens, Massachusetts, American officers noted attempts to enforce Nazi discipline among the ranks. Yet even here, cracks widened. Prisoners who had labored on farms returned with stories of American generosity. Farmers' wives serving pie, children waving from porches, guards chatting like neighbors. These small interactions carried weight. Against the drone of propaganda, the taste of warm apple pie was stubborn truth. The economics of POW labor highlighted another disparity. In Germany, captured Soviets were worked to exhaustion, often starved. In America, German prisoners received fair rations, paid credits, and occasional leisure. Red Cross inspections confirmed calorie counts averaging 3,200 per day, higher than many civilians in Europe. Prisoners who harvested potatoes in Idaho recalled guards joking that the spuds are endless. The smell of roasted potatoes drifting from mess tents reinforced the joke and the reality. Food here was plentiful enough to share with enemies. Letters arriving from Germany sharpened the contrast. Families described nights in shelters, shortages of coal, bread lines stretching down streets. One POW sister wrote that a single pound of butter cost 20 Reichsmarks, nearly a week's wages. Meanwhile, the prisoner himself was eating daily portions of buttered bread inside a camp thousands of miles away. He confessed in his diary that guilt mixed with relief. Yet that dissonance gnawed at the old certainties. If America could treat its enemies so decently, perhaps the Reich's stories were illusions. Even recreation spoke volumes. Camps organized soccer matches and theatrical plays. Guards watched as prisoners stitched uniforms from scraps, rehearsed lines, and played before cheering crowds of fellow inmates. The crack of a ball on leather, the laughter echoing across fields, the applause, it all carried a message. America had space, time, and confidence enough to let enemies find joy within its borders. No secret police burst in to halt a song. No commissar demanded ideological purity before a game. That absence was as revealing as abundance. By 1944, some prisoners openly admitted their admiration for America's model. One engineer wrote after observing a General Motors plant that efficiency is their true weapon, not rhetoric. A farmer captured in Tunisia marveled that American fields yielded twice what German farms did with half the labor. Each observation chipped away at dogma. One officer concluded privately that Germany fights with desperation, America fights with comfort. The sentence captured the essence of the ideological crack. Still, the revelation was incomplete. Prisoners could sense America's might, taste its abundance, and feel its humanity. But the scale of that power on the battlefield was something only numbers could hint at. At night, from camp loudspeakers, they heard radio reports of convoys crossing the Atlantic, more than 1,000 ships in a single operation guarded by aircraft carriers. Some dismissed it as propaganda. Others, remembering the shipyards and factories, believed. When the news of Normandy came in June 1944, describing 156,000 Allied troops landing in one day, even the skeptics fell silent. They had glimpsed the machine that made such feats possible. For now, inside the wire, daily life continued. Work, letters, classes, soccer games. Yet a shift had begun. The Reich's myths no longer held absolute sway. Pie shared on a porch, medicine given without demand, lessons chalked on a board. These had pried open doors in the mind. And behind those doors waited the ultimate proof, still unseen. The staggering scale of America's armies, fleets, and air wings unleashed in Europe and the Pacific. That confrontation would erase the last doubts, and then the hedgerows forced a fix no manual had printed yet. The final revelation came not from camp fences or farm fields, but from the war front itself, where reports filtered back of industrial might turned into battlefield weight. For German prisoners who had doubted, the evidence became irrefutable when they read of D-Day. June 6, 1944, 156,000 Allied troops, more than 5,000 vessels, and nearly 12,000 aircraft committed to a single day's assault. American newspapers, available in camps under censorship, printed staggering figures. A prisoner who had seen Liberty ships sliding into water every week now understood where they went. Each convoy that once seemed impossible was suddenly real, ferrying men and machines across the Channel in a tide no German defense could stem. The numbers were dizzying. Quartermaster reports confirmed that for the Normandy build-up alone, the United States shipped 2.5 million tons of supplies in 90 days. To men who had watched trains of tank cars rolling endlessly through Illinois, the statistics made sense. This was the destination of that flood. Cigarette smoke curled above camp barracks as prisoners whispered the truth. No propaganda had prepared them for the idea of armies landing with entire bakeries, fuel pipelines and field hospitals already packed in crates. One POW muttered, "It is as if they moved a city across the sea." The air war delivered its own testimony. From the fences of Midwestern camps, prisoners sometimes saw contrails etched across the sky, dozens of streaks converging overhead. They knew each line meant bombers on their way to Europe. U.S. records show that by late 1944, the Army Air Forces deployed more than 12,000 heavy bombers, with 42,000 fighters in support. Compare this to the Luftwaffe's dwindling 3,000 operational aircraft. The math was brutal. A former Luftwaffe pilot captured in Tunisia sighed when he read of Berlin raids involving 1,500 bombers at once. He remembered how Germany once celebrated a strike of 50 planes. Now the enemy treated hundreds as routine. News of the Pacific deepened the shock. From camps in Arkansas and Texas, prisoners read bulletins of American fleets hammering island after island, Tarawa, Saipan, Leyte. Reports listed carrier groups so large that the sea itself seemed armored. In one operation, Task Force 58 deployed 15 aircraft carriers and more than 900 planes. To a Kriegsmarine sailor imprisoned in Oklahoma, this was unthinkable. He had sailed in convoys where a single carrier was considered decisive. Here, entire task forces moved like floating cities, each bristling with aircraft, radar, and guns. The salt smell of the ocean haunted his memory as he realized Germany had no reply. Inside the camps, these battlefield revelations mixed with lived experience. Prisoners remembered the conveyor belts at Willow Run, the neon signs over Midwest depots, the taste of real coffee in their mugs. Now they could connect those sensations to battlefield outcomes. A Hershey bar in a guard's pocket was no longer just a sweet. It was proof of a society so abundant that it could treat prisoners with luxury, while still supplying front lines with overwhelming force. A guard's casual remark about overtime pay now carried weight, for it meant more bombers, more tanks, more convoys. Every small memory fused into a larger truth. Some prisoners wrestled with bitterness. Ideological hardliners claimed America's wealth was mere excess, built on exploitation, but even they could not dismiss the facts. A chaplain's notes from Camp McCoy recorded arguments where younger prisoners countered their seniors with observations. If exploitation creates this much food, this many machines, then our system is weaker by design. The debate was heated, voices echoing across the barracks, but the smell of supper wafting from the mess, meat stew thick with vegetables, undermined the diehards. The evidence of abundance was too near, too tangible. As surrender loomed in 1945, the final scale became undeniable. Reports reached camps that the United States had produced 88,000 tanks, 300,000 aircraft, and 2.4 million trucks during the war. German factories, even at their peak, could not touch those numbers. A POW who once mocked American assembly line war confessed that it was precisely the assembly line that had won. He remembered the sight of sparks raining down in Detroit, the rhythmic hammer of riveters. Those sounds echoed louder in his mind than any speech from Berlin. After Germany's capitulation in May, prisoners felt the change immediately. Censorship eased, Red Cross parcels arrived in greater numbers, and newsreels played openly. The photographs of concentration camps forced some to confront darker truths, but on the question of industrial might, doubt had long since vanished. They had lived inside the proof. The creak of American trucks delivering coal to heat barracks in Kansas was not theory. It was survival. The smell of diesel and the sight of endless convoys had been woven into their captivity. Repatriation brought the final reflection. On trains moving east toward embarkation ports, prisoners once again watched America roll by. They saw factories still humming, farms still abundant, families still buying cars even with millions of men returning home. At a stop near Philadelphia, a group of civilians waved from the platform. Women in summer dresses, children holding ice cream cones. One prisoner thought back to his bombed-out hometown and realized the war had not hollowed America. It had enriched it. The contrast was painful, but it explained everything. Years later, memoirs revealed how deep the impression had gone. Former prisoners described America as a land of lights, a phrase born from the first train rides past neon towns. They wrote of the smell of roasted peanuts at depots, the shock of Coca-Cola signs glowing after midnight, the taste of butter thick on bread. These were not military statistics, yet they carried as much weight as tonnage charts. They were human proofs that America's power rested not only on weapons, but on the daily abundance of civilian life. Historians would later argue that this abundance was itself a weapon. Tanks and planes mattered, but so did the fact that American workers had refrigerators at home, that farmers ate well, that even prisoners of war were granted rations of meat and coffee. Such resilience meant that morale stayed high, strikes were rare, and production soared. The United States had not won by propaganda alone. It had won by feeding, clothing, and equipping its people, and even its captives, at levels no dictatorship could match. For the German POWs who witnessed it firsthand, the lesson was unforgettable. Many returned to a shattered homeland, determined to rebuild on different principles. Some later admitted that their first doubts about Nazism began not with defeat in battle, but with the sight of American plenitude in small-town depots. A prisoner's diary captured the essence. "We thought we fought giants of steel. Instead, we fought a people who made steel as easily as they made bread." In the end, the story of German POWs in America is not only about captivity. It is about revelation, about men who arrived with visions of a decadent, divided enemy and discovered instead an industrial democracy firing on all cylinders. They saw fields that stretched to the horizon, factories that never slept, and people who lived with a confidence that abundance would last. Their shock was real, their disbelief honest, and their eventual recognition a testament to the scale of what they had encountered. Epilogue. America's victory in the Second World War was forged not just on the beaches of Normandy or the skies over Berlin, but in the factories that ran through the night, the farms that yielded bushels beyond count, and the homes where lights never went out. Abundance itself became a weapon, one that eroded enemy faith and sustained allies alike. The prisoners who saw it carried the memory home, proof that war can be won not only by force of arms, but by the power of plenty, dignity, and resolve. If you found this story compelling, subscribe for the next series, where we explore how another enemy once underestimated the quiet strength of ordinary people and lost.